Hey everyone, I'm Seth, this is Beth. We work on Nifty Supply. Nifty Supply is a NFT creation platform, art registry, and marketplace that empowers and supports emerging artists. And Beth leads ecosystem design at Nifty Supply, and she's going to tell you a little bit about what we're working on.
Yeah, so the question arises, how are NFTs able to actually support emerging artists? And I think the answer to that question comes from enabling kind of a user-centered mechanism design approach. So, to answer this question, so when I first joined the space and was saying, looking into this idea of, the conversation is led by how blockchain can support artists who are already part of the establishment, who are concerned about authenticity, provenance, these also very important questions of like attribution and identity and, the source of art. But there's this whole other area of, groups of artists who are just starting out or they're anti-establishment, and yet they're also like very important like vessels for the collective to actually have their values be kind of spoken and expressed through art, but also codified and if you think of a mural or like a piece of work that is existing in a physical space, or in a digital space, art is this very important tool for collective values. So, I was really captivated by this idea of how we can actually connect funding mechanisms. That is what all the kind of emerging queer like artists that I spoke to identified as the primary need for how blockchain could actually serve them. So it's this question of what is the need that emerging artists have in the first place, and also what can blockchain uniquely provide? Because I'm from San Francisco. There's I'm sure everyone is familiar with this issue of how artists are getting pushed out by tech. So it's this kind of vicious feedback loop of art being so crucial for putting forward these supposed values of like collective impact and everything, but then once it catches on and the values that are put forward through art pervade kind of an area like in San Francisco, then artists get pushed out and they're not actually able to be supported. So it's like there has to be some almost supply chain approach to actually zipping up like the funding vectors and the actual artists who could provide support from them. So using this approach of user-centered mechanism design, we talked to a ton of different artists and said, question one, how can blockchain support your needs? They were like, well, F blockchain, like that sounds like another thing, a patronizing tech approach to, trying to exploit or control us with tech. And so I was like, okay, I have to step back to a further primitive. How can, what are the primary needs you have? And it's basically, having some source of funding that's able to be, divorced from like grants or, that push art in a particular direction, or a model of scarcity where, people who could be spending time, creating these important like expressive pieces are actually forced into these like funnels of expression from grants. So it's like that's one issue, and also just a complete paucity of like access to funding, and it's like this desert of access to creation while so much wealth is kind of spiraling around. And so in talking to all of these different individuals who drag performers, like conceptual artists, performance artists, painters, and saying, what is it that stops you from kind of tying into, the wealth of resources that's there? And one of the primary concerns is, not wanting to sell out in this, very powerful way where it's like, if your options are either this grant that kind of constricts the value that you're creating and dictates it, or creating work for like the system that's oppressing you, like what is, how could that be different? And so basically, what we're hoping to do with NFTs and what I think is possible is to leverage this idea that I'm sure everyone is familiar with after today of NFTs enabling partial ownership of something, or there to be this unit of value that exists on chain and off chain, et cetera. How can we use partial ownership to actually enable collective stewardship? So and I guess the way of doing that is to look at token engineering kind of methods such as like a bonding curve to be able to say like, okay, we are going to create this new governance model that artists are at, a model for the governance of how funds actually flow to artists and flow through the system, that artists are able to actually be involved in creating. How can we ensure that the artists are like directly involved by having the actual token, like by having their actual work in this token that's created, then provide the basis for, this funding structure that they actually, define the parameters for, define, this is who's able to get involved and why, and then you can have, as James was talking about, a curation market, a trustless protocol for saying, our work is going to have this funding vector, it's going to have this output, and we're actively involved in defining that. So one way of doing that is through kind of these residency programs. So I think Seth can talk some about that, and I can talk some about, what I've been creating in San Francisco similarly, and how we hope to link them in the next year and really use Nifty Supply as a way of pushing that forward.
Thanks, Beth. Yeah, so I hope that gave you a decent idea of some of the mechanisms we're thinking about for helping artists get predictable revenue streams. So one way we're sort of working on doing that is with these residency programs, and we're working with an artist in residency program in the Bronx, basically trying to turn that into a microcosm and sort of an experiment where we can learn about the needs of artists, but really experiment with the technology that we're creating. So we do what's called self-enforcing royalty contracts, and we allow an artist to always capture value whenever their work changes hands. This seems to be what they're most interested right now. So essentially, we're working with this residency program, and we're going to help them tokenize all of their work. And basically, one thing that's important for us is that it should be completely permissionless. So we allow the artists to essentially have complete ownership over their contracts, and they are fully upgradable, and we do not do any kind of rent seeking. So they can always capture that value. That's one institution where we're working with. We'll also be doing a residency program in Bushwick that will be open for artists to apply to, and we look forward to telling you more about that in the future.
Cool. And yeah, I don't know how we're doing on time, but just to kind of go into some more specifics, I know I said a lot of jargon terms, related to tokens and that kind of stuff. And so just to quickly go into one example about how this is going to work, and one thing that we have started at Starfish Network in San Francisco, as well as to have an artist in residency program that flows from the creation, or is connected to the creation of this one NFT. So it's basically having this patronage model for a work that kind of benefits and beautifies the entire like a physical space. So it's people stake in, people who are that the artist is interested in being an additional and a patron or a donor or a sponsor, however you want to think about it, the initial group of people who would seed the funding of this item, and then the kind of residency that flows through it. So it's like they'll create this work throughout the scope of their residency, but the ability to actually participate in the residency is kind of defined by this mechanism of staking in that flows through how much people actually pay the NFT itself. And in our first example, then the question of how one actually pays the NFT, we actually had a QR code painted into this painting. So it's like this very tangible, not only peer-to-peer like payment, but like peer-to-peer like definition of a governance system. So anyway, that's the sort of thing we're exploring, and we're just at the beginning, but it's pretty exciting. So yeah, you should look us up at nifty.supply.
Awesome. Thanks for listening.
Yeah.